The invisible smugglers worked fast. I would have been impressed with their coordination if I wasn't busy fearing for my life. How long had they been watching us? If they wanted the bike back, why grab us first? And where were we going? I slid several inches as the ship rocketed forward. The jerkwads hadn't strapped us down at all, and the floor was speckled with dirt. If this is the kind of care they put into everything, I thought with scorn, then I'm not surprised they lost all their animals. After a lengthy silence in which we angled upward slightly, the smugglers exchanged words in their foreign tongue. A chair creaked as one got up and tap-tapped back to us. A dim light clicked on nearby. I found myself turned over onto my back, still in an awkward pose, with Zephyr similarly positioned next to me, angled for a good view of the bug-eyed face that hovered over us. I hope we're not about to be eaten, I thought unfairly. We were not. I realized that this was a species I'd seen before, though I couldn't remember the name. This individual was blue-black with lighter blue tips and roughly human size, so probably male. A female would have been bigger. I knew that much, but little else. The alien began talking in passable rockback with an accent and a hissing lisp. He wasted no time on niceties. "You will catch animals for us," he told me with a wrist talon pointed at my head. "If you do not, then we will gut this one and sell his plates off-world." The talon gestured to Zephyr. I didn't doubt that the smuggler would do it. And there probably was a market somewhere for turtledillo shell segments, which didn't bear thinking about. The smuggler was moving toward me with a strange device. I couldn't tell what it was until it touched my shoulder and restored my ability to speak. I coughed instead, licking dry lips and thinking madly. The smuggler told me, "You are no good to us if you don't cooperate." The driver shouted an interjection, and the speaker added, "Never mind, you are probably good for leather, but that's not worth much. Answer now, will you capture the animals for us, or do we kill the both of you now and start skinning?" Put that way, it wasn't much of a choice. I would have liked to say something rebellious, like every action hero I knew of, but that wouldn't do me any good. Dying now was out of the question. I wrapped myself in false confidence and answered in the affirmative. "I will catch the animals," I said. The smuggler leaned back, out of my field of vision. I still couldn't move my eyes. "Good," he said. "Do not disobey. Your friend here will suffer for anything we don't like." I heard more footsteps and miscellaneous scrapes. Something cold fastened about my neck with a click. "This is a shock collar. Do you know what they do?" Crap. Shock me, I assume. "Yes, anytime you need mild disciplining. Would you like to know what it feels like?" "No, I believe you—" My jaw clenched as untold volts tore through me. It was incredibly painful. Everything was on fire and I couldn't breathe. After a long few seconds, the electricity cut off. I lay there panting and sweating, unable to tell if I had soiled myself. That hurt a lot. Mild disciplining, my ass. "Obey," the smuggler instructed me. "Yes," was all I managed through jaw muscles that were still more than a little stiff. I wanted to voice a few select insults, but it wasn't worth getting shocked again. I was sure thinking them, though. The smuggler didn't bother to do the same routine on Zephyr, simply leaving him frozen there as insurance on my good behavior. He still didn't secure us against sharp turns either, which was more than a little irritating when the shuttle took a steep dive. We slid again. The jerk just went back to the seat up front and let us. I swore quietly, glad I was able to talk. Not that there was much I could do with that right now, other than reassure Zephyr. I wasted no time in telling him I would look for the first safe chance to escape and get him out with me. These bastards wouldn't be getting away with it. Zephyr couldn't answer. I hoped he believed me. Neither despair nor blind rage would do him any favors when his paralysis wore off. I hoped it would wear off. There was no way this was healthy. Shadows flashed past, making me try to blink. I realized that they were trees lit by moonlight. We were in the forest. The shuttle slowed in midair, coming to rest on the ground so smoothly that I didn't realize we'd landed until the smugglers both got up to walk around and open the doors. With the lights turned up, I saw that the driver was female, a good head taller than the male, colored in purples and reds, with sharper blade arms. Both aliens were just as beat up as the hover cycle. Did Rumble's people manage that? My jaws were working normally again, though nothing else was. "What happened to you?" I asked. "A crash," said the male sourly. "We couldn't get fuel at our usual stop," the female elaborated. "Surviving the landing at all is something you should respect." The male was staring directly at her like he wanted her to stop talking, but didn't want to say so out loud. "Why couldn't you get fuel?" I asked, because no one had told me to shut up yet. "Blockade at the station. Also not my fault." "Anyway," the male cut in, "that is beside the point." I connected a couple dots. The people fighting the cops at the space station meant no one is allowed in, or just extra security so they'd realize what you were carrying. The male triggered the shock collar at that, and I had a few seconds of electricity-filled regrets. When I could breathe again, he waved the controls at me. "Pay attention." I did. The two smugglers presented me with a variety of tools and some very simple instructions. Catch the animals, bring them back to the shuttle, don't try to escape. "Why can't you catch them?" I asked, hoping they didn't zap me for asking more questions. "Why me?" "You will be faster," the male said. "You're expendable," added the female, getting another glare from the male. They turned back to business, explaining each of the tools that they had for me. There weren't many, but they looked useful. A net launcher that was supposed to be silent, a remote-activated paralysis disc the size of a manhole cover, several noisemakers on different frequencies that would attract certain animals, a pair of night vision goggles that had a fighting chance of fitting my head, and a collection of muzzles and collars. It would do. The two aliens would not be joining me. They carried me out of the ship before undoing the paralysis, apparently taking no chances that I'd try something desperate. They set me down face up, then checked my pockets thoroughly. I'd really hoped that they'd skip that step. My phone would have summoned the cops in no time. But they found it, and the dagger Zephyr had given me, along with the nearly empty wallet I'd brought along and a variety of pocket detritus. They took it all, retreating with another reminder that they wouldn't hesitate to use the shock collar. I agreed to behave. They released the paralysis. I collapsed when they did, smacking one hand on a rock. The ground was spongy with fallen leaves. I sat up with a groan and a few more quiet curses, rubbing my hand as I looked around. Yep, this was a forest at night. It smelled like mud and was super dark. Those goggles were going to be crucial. I looked back at the shuttle, invisible again, and my captors, who stood in front of it with the collar controls held threateningly. "Get up." I got up. It was a little painful, but I felt things loosening up by the second. At least I wouldn't have to hobble around the forest, chasing cats and rabbits and who knew what else. Zebras. I turned to ask them what kind of animals I should expect. They were gone, apparently having stepped back into the ship. I sighed. Fishing the goggles out of the pile of supplies, I tried to formulate a plan. Didn't come up with much. The goggles made the forest green and brightly lit, as opposed to black and full of darkness. Good. Now where were these animals that the smugglers expected me to find? A look around was of no use, so I gathered up the gear into a bag, which the smugglers had provided but not bothered to use themselves. Rude. And I started walking. It occurred to me several steps in that there could easily be other things in this forest than escaped pets. I had a cursory familiarity with the most common of the native animals, mostly to better deal with earth critters who'd run afoul of them. But I had very little idea of what to do when faced with some nocturnal beastie with more teeth than sense. Here's hoping I find none of those, I thought resolutely. Now, should I start calling out for Kitty Kitty and see what happens, or just be stealthy? Well, on the chance that those beasties are about, I think I'll be staying silent for now. The smugglers can't expect me to catch what I can't find. So I kept walking, sweeping the area with my eyes and listening to every sound. I wondered what the odds were of convincing the smugglers to let me come back in the daylight. Probably not good. Then, to my surprise, I found an earth animal, half of one. The rabbit haunches lay in a dark puddle that was as green as everything else to my goggled eyes. I spent a long few moments frozen cautiously in place, listening before I approached. Nothing snarled or jumped out to scare me away from its prey. I carefully set the bag down, then pulled out the net launcher and eased my way forward. It was the closest thing I had to a weapon. A detailed look at the gory sight told me that the rabbit had been killed by something predatory with sharp teeth, and that this had been several hours ago. The body was cool. Hand sanitizer was near the top of the list of things I would have loved to have right now, right after phone and stun gun. Well, there's not much I can do for this one, I thought. The smugglers probably only want the live ones. Probably. How am I supposed to tell them when I've caught something anyway? I looked around for the invisible ship, with a predictable lack of results. The forest here was sparse enough that the shuttle could float between trees without moving a branch. I had only a rough idea of how big it was. All right, executive decision, moving on, and not bringing this guy as bait. I stood and moved away, returning to the bag of gear. Still no signs of life. Then something whined. I froze. There it was again. That sounds suspiciously like a dog. I left the gear where it was, tracking down the noises with my trusty net gun at the ready. Something moved under a bush. I crouched down and did my best to see into the dense foliage. A dark lump of some sort huddled in the center. It could have been a dog. "Hey there," I said gently. "You want to come out? I won't bite if you won't." That was a very canine whimper. The lump shifted, then crawled toward me. I stepped back just in case it was a dog-like alien beastie. It was a beagle. Young adult, favoring one front paw, with a dark patch on its muzzle that might have come from the rabbit. Well, beagles are hunting dogs, I reminded myself. "Hey, buddy," I said, holding out a hand. "You okay?" The dog limped over to my hand and nuzzled it, whimpering and licking. I set down my net gun and stroked the poor thing before taking a look at its injured foot. Just a bruise, by the looks of things, but I'd want to be sure in better lighting. There were no visible cuts, and the bones didn't feel broken, though it was hard to say in this green darkness. I retrieved the bag to fish out a collar and a leash, which the dog appeared familiar with. When I had these fastened in place, just as I was starting to wonder what to do next, a blinding glare appeared behind me. I screwed my eyes shut, keeping one hand clenched on the leash while I pulled off the goggles. The dog whimpered again and crawled to hide behind my legs. Yep, there were the smugglers, right on time, with floodlights that made their lives easier, never mind my burned retinas. They ordered me to get the dog into a storage crate. I did, wanting to give it a full checkup and a bath instead. That was definitely blood on its face, but there didn't appear to be any cuts. I checked out the paw quickly to be sure. Good enough. Then the male smuggler shut the door of the crate and ordered me back into the woods. I went, though not before giving them explicit instructions about what sort of care the animal would need. They ignored me, not really a surprise, back into the green-tinged night. I was honestly impressed that the dog had been close enough to stumble upon. I didn't expect to find anything else. I was wrong again. This time it was porcupines, a herd of them. Do porcupines travel in herds? The group name is probably something dumb like Passel or Gruntling. But yeah, it was a herd. My vet training didn't cover porcupines. I wasn't pleased about any of this. I heard the snuffling and the rustle of leaves first, then approached slowly enough that they didn't see me right away. I actually had enough time to crouch, set down the gear, and stand up again with the net launcher before one of them noticed. A dozen pairs of eyes suddenly stared at me while the air filled with angry grunting. I edged forward as if I knew what I was doing. They did a threat display that involved a lot of quill-covered tails waving at me. I fired the net gun, which was as quiet as promised, but not super accurate. It sort of snared one of them while the rest waddled away at top speed. I rushed forward to do something. Ever wrestle a porcupine? It was a first for me, too, and it was every bit as unpleasant as you might expect. My only saving grace was the fact that the net had caught the porcupine's head, which meant it couldn't see where I was in order to spike me. So I somehow managed, through luck and undignified scrambling, to grab hold of the net and pull it to where it actually held the squealing creature against the ground. I held it there, panting. Now what? There probably wouldn't be any help coming from the smugglers. Even with their paralysis tasers, they seemed to be extremely unwilling to put themselves into the action, maybe because of their injuries. Maybe they were just jackasses. Either way, it was up to me. And the leashes that were almost close enough to reach. After a lot of struggling, squealing, and thrashing, I edged across the dirt to where I could hook a foot around the bag's strap and pull it closer, then contort myself to free a hand without letting off pressure on the net and yank a leash out. Or, more accurately, grab one leash and spend more time trying to untangle the others that came with it, one-handed, while not letting the porcupine escape or get me with its quills. Finally, I freed a leash. I threaded it through the edge of the net, hoping the porcupine would cooperate enough to let me tie it up. Predictably, it didn't like this. Threading one side of the net wasn't so bad, with my feet straining to hold the other side down like the most awkward game of Twister, though the other side was a near miss of quills to the arm. "Hey, I got it!" I yelled at the sky. "Come and get the dang thing, it's not going anywhere!" For a moment, nothing moved. Then those floodlights appeared to my right. I managed to close my eyes and turn away before my vision was completely washed out. The smugglers appeared with another crate and very little sympathy for my difficulties. Before going out again, I demanded gloves but was refused on the grounds that they didn't have any. Reasonable, I suppose, but still annoying. "I really need Zephyr's help," I said, "and it's not like we'll be able to escape, what with the shock collars and you guys following us all invisible." They weren't buying it. Back to work for me. Further complaining would be met with a zap from the shock collar. I gave up and went, faking a limp for sympathy that I didn't get. The rest of the porcupines were predictably long gone. I did my best to track their footprints in the leaves, but other than the original scattering, there wasn't much to see. I kept walking for lack of anything better to do. The forest seemed a bit brighter up ahead, smelling more like wood chips than mud. I trudged onward, pressing through a spiky mass of bushes to find an odd clearing with fallen trees that looked like they had been politely pressed aside. I stopped, taking in the sight. It had to be the crash site. The ship was probably still there, broken and invisible, and I couldn't let the smugglers know that I realized that. I pretended to hear a sound off to the right, then moved away at a stealthy pace like I was actively stalking something. Who knew? There might actually be porcupines there. There weren't, but after a long bit of walking, I reached muddy ground that held footprints better than the leaves, and that was helpful. Gotcha. That herd of prints probably belonged to the porcupines. Probably. I followed it. And this time, when I found them, I had my net gun ready. I'd been considering doing a deliberately bad job on this capture, just so the smugglers would see how much I needed assistance. But as it turned out, I didn't need to try. As soon as the net left the gun, they all saw it and scattered. I had to run after them, belatedly wondering just how many nets were stored in that launcher. 3, as it turned out. That third net snared the biggest porcupine in the herd, and when I went to launch another to seal the deal, nothing came out. So, back to swearing and struggling. At least now I'd done it before, not that that really helped. The local plant life turned out to be more useful. I wrestled the critter into a shrub and managed to pin it there while I tried to slip a hand under it without getting spiked. I'd remembered that there were no quills on the underside of the tail. When the porcupine tried to hit me and missed, woo, I laid a hand on the ground. The thick tail smacked onto my palm. No pain. I closed my fingers, moving along the grain of the quills, and soon had a solid grip. That was a thick, meaty tail. I hauled the 30-pound animal from the bush with one hand on its tail and the other wrapped in the net that tangled the rest of it. I knelt just inches from a mud puddle and yelled for the aliens to show up and take it from me. The porcupine joined in with angry noises that would have been cute under other circumstances. I hadn't really heard a porcupine's voice before today. It sounded like a person doing an impression of a teddy bear that could almost talk, a furious one. The floodlights blinded both of us, and I complained along with the porcupine. When the unwieldy armload of spikes was safe in a cage with water, I insisted again that I needed Zephyr. This time the smugglers actually listened. Or maybe they'd been arguing with each other about it while I struggled about in the bushes. Either way, I approved of their decision. "What's the plan?" Zephyr muttered, scowling fiercely while he tugged at his own shock collar. An abrupt lightning strike of pain said they'd tased us both. It hurt just as much the second time. "Don't touch it," hissed one of the smugglers while we twitched. "Now get out there and don't try anything." They don't know I found the ship. I kept my teeth clenched while I regained muscle control and limped away from the shuttle. At least I don't think they know. Now what? Zephyr wheezed a bit as he followed me. As soon as he cleared the door, a gust of displaced air said it was shut with invisible silence. I considered telling him about my discovery, but I was pretty sure that the shuttle's sensors were good enough to overhear us. Instead, I reassured him that I wasn't hurt, and that this would be easier with 6 arms instead of 2. Thankfully, the smugglers had had a second pair of goggles, so he could walk without tripping over everything. We set out after the new tracks in the mud, discussing plans. We would find the herd silently, then plant the remote-activated paralysis disc, and hopefully move around to the other side and scare them toward it. Or one of us would, while the other laid in wait with the controls. It was a pretty good plan. It might have actually worked, but luckily for us, that was when Rumble's crew showed up. Dark shapes of airships flitted through the trees from multiple angles, waiting until they surrounded the invisible shuttle to flare fiery lights. "Exit the ship, you mudborn!" The rest of the loudspeaker tirade wasn't fit for polite company. "It's Rumble!" Zephyr cheered beside me. "He got the stealth breaker working to rescue us!" That didn't seem 100% accurate, but I didn't correct him. I scoped out trees to hide behind instead. Pretty sure the local crime lord was more interested in taking out a rival than in saving people he'd just met. Yup, the threats did nothing. Rockets followed. Zephyr and I dove for cover as small explosions lit the woods even brighter, impacting the shuttle several yards off the ground. They did no damage that I could see. I hope Rumble has a plan B, I thought, peering through leaves from where I crouched with Zephyr. Maybe he's going to herd them toward the police. Oh, there they go. One way or another, the shuttle had taken off at top speed. I could only tell by the trail of explosions and the way Rumble's group of airships flashed off after it. Suddenly, the forest was dark again, and very quiet. Zephyr spoke first. "Any idea how to get these collars off?"